So, I guess I should keep doing Half-Life videos. Well, it's a good thing I was going to anyway. Last video, I continued my quest to become a certified gamer by finally checking out Half-Life for the first time, as well as its masterful remake, Black Mesa. Naturally, I expected to venture forth to Half-Life 2 after that, but hold up! First, we have to check out Half-Life 1's expansion packs. Opposing Force was the first of 3 expansion packs, all of which take place during different points of the Black Mesa incident. Years later, Blue Shift came out, which I'll get into in a bit, and Decay, which I won't get to because it's a multiplayer PS2 exclusive, so I'm just going to leave it to Decay. Before I get into Opposing Force and Blue Shift, first of all, I just have to thank you guys massively for your massive support on the last video. Normally, I would thank everybody for all their comments, but there's a lot of comments on the last video, so here's a few of my favorites. This one especially. This one was just brilliant. Last of all, I would like to give an enormous thank you to my patrons Stin, Dotman, Jesse, Angel, The Foe 3, Papa Noob 345, Dominic, and my newest patron, Senriem. Kinda sounds like Zenriem? Anyway. Opposing Force follows the POV of Adrian Shephard, an illiterate moron who's been commissioned to... well, I'll let the old corporal fill you in. In all seriousness, the mission is of course to contain the outbreak and eliminate all evidence of it, including the aliens and the Nazis. You probably think I'm just continuing that stupid joke from my last video, but trust me, this is no joke. If you'd afford me a little bit of your time, I'd like to tell you all about Operation Paperclip. Safe to say the mission is not exactly off to an ideal start though, as you and your comrades are immediately swept up in the alien invasion. And like Half-Life 1, it's a damn good intro. Suddenly you wake to find yourself in the clutches of the Nazis as one of them feasts on the corpse of your fallen brother. Luckily you escape and on the way out steal an armored vest as well as a pipe wrench to act as your signature melee weapon. You do get a cute little pocket knife too, but you'll never use it. As quickly as you dropped into Black Mesa, you receive transmissions informing you to evacuate ASAP. But even when you make it to the evacuation site, that bastard Slippin' Jimmy prevents you from escaping. What a sick joke! So with that, you'll have to find another way out of this hellhole, and thankfully you're not left with just a wrench and a knife, because not only do you require weapons at a faster rate than in Half-Life 1, and not only is the roster of weapons even larger here, but I think the weapons are even better and possibly even the best in the whole franchise. Ah, yummy! You've got some familiar weaponry returning, like the SMG, the shotgun, the RPG, and hand grenades. The Glock returns as well, while the Magnum doesn't, having been replaced by a Deagle. The MP5 isn't your only automatic rifle this time around, as you also acquire an LMG later into the game. The crossbow's been replaced by an overpowered sniper, and while unorthodox weaponry like the gauze gun and gluon gun unfortunately don't return, their replacements more than make up for it. First up, the Displacer Cannon, which when fired teleports enemies away. Finally, they will understand the torment I went through. I wish there was a little more sense of impact when firing this thing, you know, a little more you know, it's just kind of like, but I'm nitpicking. It's still a lot of fun. Not only that, but as you saw earlier, if you right-click, you will be teleported around. There's also the Spore Launcher, which is this cute little critter that you feed spores to, who then fires them back at enemies. Opposing Force's alternate take on the Hive Hand is the Shock Roach, and it's a million times better, as it fires off little plasma balls, which are actually pretty powerful. And while not necessarily a weapon, though it can be used as one, the final piece of your arsenal is the Barnacle Grapple, which you can use to latch onto any organic matter. By the way, the same scientist that made this thing is one of the scientists you performed the initial experiment with in Half-Life 1.
Unfortunately, the administrator has called me down to the anomalous materials lab this morning for an important experiment, so I don't have any time to further my analysis.
That's a pretty cool little way of tying things in the universe together. Plus, around this part of Opposing Force, you get to walk through a bunch of different observatories of Zen creatures, and it's really cool to see this more in-depth look at the inner workings of the facility. Even Black Mesa expanded upon this, which I didn't even get to mention last video. Now, during all that blabbering I was doing, some of you deagle-eyed viewers may have noticed something. Who the hell are those guys? Quite early into the adventure, you see some personnel get absolutely brutalized by an unknown life form in the next room. While the first couple hours of Opposing Force have you fighting the Zen creatures you've become accustomed to, the game slowly starts drip-feeding you new creatures, until by the end of the game, there's practically no Zen creatures in sight, and you're left to your lonesome to fend off this new invasion, Race X. First up, you've got the Pit Drones, and they're feisty little critters. They can pack a bit of a punch, but they're really not so bad. Whoa! What is that thing? That nightmare is is known as the Shock Trooper, and is actually what you acquire the Shock Roach from, and not long after that, you run into the Voltigore, which is this massive scorpion-like creature. There's a section towards the end of the game where you have to navigate dungy sewers infested with these savages, and for the most part, the only way to see them is with the use of your night vision goggles.
My eyes!
Look, I get it, you're playing as a Marine, the night vision is a cool concept, but Christ, tone it down a little bit. My eyes burn less staring directly into the sun. Anyway, these guys are total badasses. They look awesome, and they can take a hell of a beating. They're practically mini-bosses because it takes multiple spores or mines to take these guys out. And keep in mind, those spores are about as powerful as the RPG. Race X continues to ramp up from there though, because you'll also encounter a few actual bosses. The first of which being the Pit Worm, or Eagle apparently. And this guy looks wicked. This section of the game is basically Gearbox copying the Tentacle Monster section for homework and making very minimal changes, because just like that chapter, here you have to flip on a few switches before dealing with the monstrosity.
Fuck you, asshole!
Fun fact, what you have to switch on here are the Valve and Gearbox, Valve being the developers of Half-Life 1, and Gearbox being the developers of these expansions. Very cheeky reference. I gotta say though, the Blast Pit was way cooler than the Alaskan Bullworm. The tentacular beast just gets fucking incinerated while this giant worm gets flushed away with poo. You might be wondering what exactly Race X's purpose in the story is beyond just being a new obstacle for you to overcome as the Zen invasion comes to a close, thanks to Gordon defeating the Nihilanth. Well, the reason they've come to Earth is because they're sort of like space pirates, but without the dancing.
Cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-chingery.
While they're not inhabitants of Zen, the Black Mesa incident was able to create an opening for Race X to invade Earth as well, with their goal being to use the mightiest Race X member, the Gene Worm, to pillage the planet of its resources. We've still got a lot to cover of Opposing Force because outside of a few new weapons and enemies, they've also added a new level of interactivity with NPCs. Here you're able to call upon your fellow soldiers and instruct them to heal you and even break down doors for you. Most importantly, they'll fight right alongside you, and you'll need their help not just against Race X, but also against the Black Ops. With the military failing to cover up the Black Mesa incident, the Black Ops have been sent in here to do the job right, by planning a nuke to blow the whole facility to smithereens. These guys were actually in Half-Life 1, by the way, but I didn't mention them because they're not really that important in that game. Luckily, you're able to deactivate the bomb.
Damn you, slippin' Jimmy!
Yeah, while the G-Man was some mysterious entity, sorta just looking over things in Half-Life 1, here he's much more involved, opening doors for you, not opening doors for you, messing with bombs. He's just a conniving prick. After deactivating the bomb, but not really, you head through the storage unit and finally confront the mightiest, nastiest Race X member of all. And this final boss was much more enjoyable than the Nihilanth, which isn't saying much since the Nihilanth was ass, but, you know, it's worth noting, I guess. You utilize mounted turrets to shoot the massive monstrosity in the eyes over and over again while also lighting up its stomach until it croaks. After Gene's defeat, you suddenly find yourself back in your aircraft you first arrived in, but with Gene Takovic as well, who basically says that while he doesn't want you to die, as a witness he and his employers just can't have you out and about after everything you've just been through. So he just puts you in fucking limbo. Indefinitely. Awesome! And that was Opposing Force. Honestly, it's a perfect expansion that doesn't overstay its welcome, features some awesome new weapons, Race X is really cool, and there's a good bit of world building. There's really not much else I could ask for, which I guess is why Blue Shift feels kinda... While Opposing Force followed the perspective of the military, Blue Shift shifts POVs over to security guards, specifically in this case, Barney Calhoun's. And while Opposing Force kicks off a little while into the Zen invasion having already begun, Blue Shift begins at about the exact same time Half-Life 1 does, and in the same way Half-Life 1 does, with a tram car ride. You can even see Gordon passing by. Hi, Gordon. And you can check security cameras and watch as Gordon enters the laboratories. As much as I loved the frantic, fast-paced frenzy that was Opposing Force, little slice-of-life moments like these, or slice-of-half-life moments, are such a nice bit of detail to make the Half-Life universe feel alive.
Let's try this. Shouldn't you be guarding some donuts and coffee right about now?
The way the resonance cascade occurs here is a pretty cool perspective too, as you're just taking an elevator which suddenly stops and from thin air, Vortigaunts and other Zen creatures begin their hostile takeover. The rail system goes completely, well, off the rails. and you're sent crashing to the sublabs. Although Opposing Force added a bunch of new weapons and an entire new species of aliens to combat, Blue Shift is, I guess you could say, more reserved in its approach. It doesn't add any new weapons. I mean, it kinda does. With Blue Shift's release, it also included HD models, which changed the look of guns, equipment, NPCs, and with this, the Glock was changed to a Beretta, while the SMG was swapped to an assault rifle, the M4 to be specific, but those are about as new of weapons as you'll get, if you even have HD models enabled, which I don't think many people do. It sounds like a lot of people hate them. Maybe I just don't really care about graphics as much, or I'm just blind. Oh wait, I am. It could also just be that I'm not nostalgic for the original models since I just started playing these games a couple months ago, but I think many of the model changes look alright. If I had to pick a style, I guess I'd stick with the originals, but these aren't horrible. But yeah, anyway, all you get is a condensed roster of weapons from Half-Life 1, which is kinda disappointing. And look, I'm not asking for anything crazy, but the crowbar's Gordon's thing. Can't Barney get like a nightstick? Maybe a taser that can only be used to stun enemies during the early portions of the game until you find a gun or something, making you have to rely a bit more on stealth and strategy to survive early doors? Would have been cool and given Blue Shift an even stronger sense of identity, especially in contrast to Opposing Force's frenetic nature. Rather than trying to offer up a bunch of new content gameplay-wise, Blue Shift attempts to pay more attention to finer details. For example, in Half-Life 1 and Opposing Force, you use the HEV stations to charge your armor. Here, however, Barney does not have the privilege of these high-tech innovations, so to bolster your defense, you have to rummage the corpses of your fallen brethren for their armor. Honestly, it's pretty badass. It's like the same energy as Bardock using his friend's blood-soaked armband, you know? Oh, and speaking of fallen brethren... What the hell was that? That was more of a force fall than when Mark Henry pushed Batista. Okay, but here's another minor detail I loved. Later into the game, you go to these very old teleportation labs. So old, in fact, that they have outdated first aid and HEV stations. And also, to open the security doors, the scientists have to use their hands rather than the retina scanners you see others use throughout Black Mesa. Again, very minor detail, but I love that. What I don't love here is the pathetic excuse of a flashlight. Look, I know I complained about the night vision brightness in Opposing Force, but at least you could see more than you couldn't, because what the hell is this flashlight? Half-Life 1 knew this mechanic was ass, so it barely had dark spaces to maneuver through. I swear there's more pitch black rooms and vents in Blue Shift than there is in all of Half-Life 1. Okay, now back to the story. A wounded scientist tells you that your best chance of making it out alive is to find Dr. Rosenberg. Heisenberg. No, Hank. Rosenberg. So with that, you head off to the freight yards the scientist spoke of in search of him. And every scientist you rescue until you actually find Rosenberg will introduce themselves as not Dr. Rosenberg.
I'm afraid I'm not Dr. Rosenberg.
Nah, sorry guys. I'm afraid I'm not Caddy. Hit it, boys! Remember when everyone had intros like this, huh? Sure did. You finally find Rosenberg and he explains that he was involved in early stage work on teleporter technology and says that there may be enough materials left in the ancient testing labs to fire up a teleporter that would enable us to escape the facility. So after dragging Rosenberg's unresponsive, sluggish, fat ass to said labs, he informs us that we'll have to travel to Zen in order to re-enable teleporter tech that would allow for earthbound teleporting. And honestly, this is not only the best part of the expansion, but overall the best version of Zen from the Half-Life 1 era. Here you venture through caves and tunnels, navigate floating platforms, and are able to just generally soak in the uneasy, eerie atmosphere of the void that is Zen. It feels more focused here than it did in Half-Life 1, which I get because Zen was rushed and they probably were just trying to cram all the ideas they wanted to, which led to it all feeling pretty half-baked. So after hooking that gizmo back up, you return to Earth to find Rosenberg having a seizure, probably from too much monologuing. So with him incapacitated, you have to venture off yourself to give the teleporter more juice since most of it was used up on your trip to Zen. After a bit of killing and puzzles, you're ready to send a power cell back up to the lab.
You can probably push the power cell through the fence into the charging station behind me. Let me see if I can get out of the way.
He died a hero. One by one, you help Black Mesa personnel escape until last but not least, it's your turn. You do a bit of dimension hopping, going from outside the base, back to Zen, to even seeing Gordon's apprehension at the hands of the military, back to...
Oh, hey, Barney.
And finally, back outside the base again. You escape the Black Mesa facility with your colleagues and everything is alright in the end. Again, on a gameplay front, Blue Shift really didn't add all that much, but it did have a happy ending, so that's nice. Whereas Opposing Force did a lot, and while I can see why people would say possibly too much, I had a blast with it. Opposing Force felt like a real expansion, while Blue Shift is just more of the same you got in Half-Life, but also less, which isn't bad. It just doesn't add anything all that noteworthy for me, but it's still Half-Life, so it's still very good at the very least, and I had a very jolly old time.
But you'll still help me, won't you?